Hello everyone. Today I'm once more going to feature the most recent test of the submarines, as well as my opinion and my take on how this addition to the game is shaping out. They still utilize the same old ping mechanic, which means you send out a ping, you can send out a narrow, fairly fast ping, or a wide, slower ping. The first ping turns any torpedoes you have launched into homing torpedoes. You can also ping first and then launch torpedoes, but generally it's better to, because they only last 30 seconds, it's better to send the torpedoes first and then ping to turn the torpedoes into homing torpedoes. If you get a ping on both the bow and the stern of the ship, that is a double ping, then your torpedoes will ignore the torpedo belt, and you tend to also score those huge citadel hits on any targets that you are torpedoing, which makes it very, very effective. Some new mechanics they've changed, or some changes to the mechanics include these. When you ping on the surface, I'm actually speeding this up because there's a couple of things I want to show here. You can ping from any direction, but your torpedo tubes are located on the bow and the stern. So in this case, I'm pinging and trying to turn around so I can use my stern torpedoes. A bit of glitchiness on the replay when zooming in, but that doesn't actually occur in the live gameplay. So I launched my stern torpedoes, I got the double pings, and I know they will be homing in on him. Now, on the surface, your concealment is, once again, significantly worse than underwater, but more importantly, pinging while on the surface no longer makes you spotted on the minimap the way it used to. In fact, they're treating pinging on the surface a bit like firing your guns, namely that it increases your detection range. And if you're spotted, then of course you maintain that bloom for a while, just the way like firing your guns would. So pings have been kind of turned into a way of shooting without really dealing any damage, but it has made pinging from the surface more dangerous. The downside of pinging underwater is of course that it takes much longer for these pings to reach the target, so it's much harder to land these pings. Also, if you're torping on close range targets, your torpedoes need a fair bit of time to actually rise out of the water. If you get spotted and hunted down by a submarine, in this case I'm speeding up once again, he's dropping depth charges. It looks quite impressive. This is sped up just to show you kind of how ridiculous this consumable you have right now is. That is the mitigation of damage. Basically it allows you to do, it's called maximum dive, and it allows you to dive to 80 meters. And I've used it and I dove down all the way to 4. You can see the depth charge there right next to the crosshair. And at 80 meters, well, the depth charges aren't really doing a whole lot. In fact, he just dropped his entire set of depth charges on me, and I'm speeding up, and he keeps dropping and dropping and dropping, and the damage is basically not there. Now, this is something that obviously can be tweaked, but this does lead to a fair bit of issues, giving the subs this much counterplay. Namely, in this example, I'm playing a battleship, a Fuso, and I know that there are submarines in the sea cap, because it got briefly started capping and then they went underwater, dodging the Ranger planes. My DD, of course, is rushing in there to drop some depth charges on them. But this is where it gets a bit iffy. First of all, he's of course outspotted by the submarines. They outspot DDs quite easily. In fact, the concealment ranges seem to be quite superior, about 1 kilometer or more better than any of the DD ships or any of the destroyers. And here we have an issue. He's trying to get in there to drop some depth charges on them. Note that this guy is 7 meters underwater, and you can only hit ships if they're 6 meters or less. So I cannot do anything about this submarine. And my DD trying to drop depth charges on them, well, he's spotted by the sub, but he's also not able to do anything about the sub who's just running away. So it does lead to some rather, honestly, challenging issues for the destroyers, because a good DD is just going to pop his consumable and go deep underwater and basically be immune to the depth charges, whereas the DD will be perma-spotted. Now, this isn't too much of an issue very, very late in the game, but in any other moments, it's The aiming is very glitchy, by the way. This is also something I have issues with. But in active situations, this is going to become very, very difficult to deal with. Like, with just one cruiser around is going to make life hell for that DD, because he's going to be perma-spotted, and he's going to be doing pitiful depth charge damage because the sub has that counterplay. Another issue is when you end up in a situation like this, where your DD is dead, and you don't have a cruiser, you're a battleship, you're a carrier, and we do have a sub. Your tools against these subs is so very, very limited. For some reason this guy is sailing on the at 5.9, which is just enough that I can reach him, and I do blap him. There was really no reason for him to do that. But of course this is still early test, so people don't really know what they're doing. But this guy sitting at 7 or deeper, there is really nothing I can do about him. I have absolutely no tools against him, and my carrier can't do anything about him either, and he can easily bob up and try to torp me. In fact, I'm speeding up now just to show how little we could do about him. This goes on for the entire game. He just sails around, tries to torp me, and no one is really able to do anything about him. Our sub tries to torp him, but it's actually not that easy to hit an actively evading sub with your own sub torpedoes. So it kind of ends up being this mess where no one can deal with this one class, and the game goes on forever. And you just have to kind of avoid his torpedoes and hope that he doesn't play too well. And there are, of course, issues with actually hitting ships. I managed to blap a fair bit of the subs, but there are a lot of issues. Basically, where you want to hit is that dot. There's a line down and there's a dot. That's where the ship surfaces, and that's where you want to aim. But it can be quite hard to fathom that, because the ships can move almost entirely underwater with just a periscope sticking out. So landing those shells can be very difficult. That's not to say that you can't catch them off guard. In this case, I see a submarine going in a straight line. I look at the minimap because I can't actually see where he's going, so I have to look at the minimap to see which direction he's taking. I lead about where the dot is showing. He's at 5.5 meters, and from a fairly decent range, 10 kilometers, I'm able to blap him quite hard with that Fuso HE. So you can punish them, but the problem is it mostly relies on the submarine player being quite unaware and just poor. Now, the reason I say this is because there's two modes. There's the surface mode and the underwater mode. But the problem is that you can do such fine control that you can sit at 5.9 meters, and then if someone shoots you, well, you can just duck right below 6.1. The shells splash harmlessly, and then you go up on the surface again, you spot, you ping, you torpedo, oh, someone shoots, you duck down again, and you can do this all the time. It's complete damage immunity whenever you choose to exert it. Now, I understand it's an arcade game, and all the ships have very arcadey controls, but this ability to just go completely damage immune at will seems very, very extreme. Especially as the ships themselves seem to be quite forgiving in how you exert damage in them. In this case, I launch my torpedoes, I push up, I ping, I am spotted, but once again, if I see any shells coming in, I can just duck underwater and get into cover. I tried to get the nose ping as well. It looks like it wasn't quite enough lead. Torpedoes coming in, once again, you don't need the torpedo bit in the ship because you can pretty much always just duck underneath the torpedoes. I try to go for another ping, and I miss again. That's two pings I completely whiffed, but that one ping is more than enough to get that perfect homing, and that Queen Elizabeth is basically a goner. And it seems a bit too forgiving when it comes to getting out of poor situations, considering how easy it is sometimes to apply damage in this thing. You have to remember that the surface ships no longer get any warning that they're being pinged. There's no information about it. And the incredible concealment, for example the U-69, even when pinging, only has something like a 4.6 km concealment, 4.9. So this Pensacola has no idea that the torps are homing in on him. And just before they land, I get the stern ping, and that of course means they ignore torpedo belt and they do citadel damage. The warning to that you're being pinged and targeted seems a bit too minimal. Subs are also in the unique situation that they can do a lot of YOLOs that a lot of other ships really can't get away with. because, well, they have that ability to disengage almost entirely. In this case, this is an actual player, and Ismail pushes around the corner. He has no idea that he's gotten pinged. He has no idea that I'm basically rushing straight into him. He's fighting my battleship behind me. I see he's shooting AP, so there's nothing to worry about. I'm just pushing in. There's his AP volley at me, does very little limited damage. I already have 2 pings. I duck underwater into cover. He's got 2 pings and homing torpedoes coming in on him. He dodges one of the torpedoes by turning in, but I only needed to land 3 and his game is basically over. And I can still keep him perma-spotted, I can keep pinging him, and unless a submarine or sorry, a destroyer or cruiser shows up to bail him out, well, he's completely out of luck. No counterplay. The DD versus submarine counterplay also seems a bit questionable. I'm fighting a Gaede, and I get the notification that a bearing was taken on an enemy submarine, which means he was somewhere nearby and he was pinging. So my farragut has gotten the bearing on him, and now I have a certain amount of time to make it there, make it to that location. And of course, the closer I get, and especially if they're pinging, I'll get more information on their location. Taking some shots on the Gepard, but ultimately I'm just rushing in. Now, the submarine players, of course, the effectiveness of a submarine player will always be down, will heavily be related to the player's skill. Poor players will overextend to get killed, they're very squishy, whereas good players will be extremely frustrating to deal with. And of course, as tiers go up and torpedo ranges probably go up, another ping, there's actually 2 of them here. So I just go straight towards them. Note that even if I spot them, you see he's 21 meters underwater, my guns are completely ineffective. My guns and torpedoes have absolutely no impact. Well, this guy is on the surface, so technically he could be shot, but at this point I'm more tunnel vision on this sub that's right underneath me, trying to get an idea of where he is. The new keybind is G. You drop depth charges, with a nice little animation of dropping them out on both sides, and then explosions in the water that honestly seem to have pretty massive AoE. And this is really fundamentally the counterplay against DDs. This is what you do. You run straight at them, you press G, it's fairly fast recharging, I think it's a 40-second cooldown before it recharges. You sail over them and you spam G and you just drop a bunch of depth charges, and you do a fair bit of damage to them as well. That's pretty much it. There's really not much else to it. Now, in theory, when there's a lot of bots, like there is right now for everyone playing on PTS, because there's just so many people queuing up in submarines and so few people playing anything else, because everyone wants to try the new submarine mechanics, you end up, but the flooding actually killed one of the subs, well, you end up in these situations where the DDs, well, they can push in very aggressively. The DDs can kind of just YOLO in and just depth charge the hell out of these submarines. But you gotta remember, in an actual game, a DD charging up like this, in the open, even with the most potato of teammates, they would be shooting him. They would be farming him, they would be blapping him. In fact, the Bayern, one of the few players here, well, he instantly takes me as a target and he starts shooting me. And I can't really get undetected because I'm being perma-spotted by the submarine. Now, this is the kind of situation I expect to see a lot more if they're added into the game, and that's DD tries to counterplay the submarine, he's perma-spotted, submarine uses the consumable to basically mitigate all depth charge damage, and then you're in some serious trouble trying to push in. And this is low tier. You gotta consider a high tier with all these incredibly powerful HE spammers. Like, good luck trying to push into a sub that's parked in front of a Smolensk. That's suicide. You push in, you get instantly melted. Dropping some torps on the Bayern, and once again I'm gonna just go straight over this guy and just start dropping these depth charges, causing flooding, causing fires. Some people have argued that it shouldn't be fires, but I don't understand what's special about fires. Electrical fires most certainly existed inside submarines, especially because of depth charge damage. I do kill him off, but ultimately the gameplay between me and the submarines is kinda, I sail on top of them, I press a button. It feels kinda like a rerun of my counterplay against carriers. They push in, I reinforce the sector, and then I hope he's potato. That's kind of what's happening with DD versus Submarines right now. I say lower him. I hope his teammates are potato enough to not shoot me. I hope the sub is potato enough to not dodge the death charges, and then we kind of just pray. Not exactly the most exciting gameplay. So where exactly does that leave us? Well, once again, the art, the design, the sound design, the visuals, it's amazing. And the concept, the idea could be okay, but honestly, I have absolutely no idea how they are hoping to make this fit into the game. Now, landing pings, especially underwater, and launching torpedoes and hitting targets can be highly satisfying, especially if you manage to nail another submarine. I was just about to nail this one when Death Charges stole him. Like, the visuals, the feel, I like the concept, I like the idea. But the simple fact is how on earth do they plan on adding this into the game and making it anywhere near balanced? This is a ship that outspots DDs. And it puts even more pressure on DDs that are already strained so thin. DDs are supposed to cap, they're supposed to spot, they're supposed to defend objectives, they're supposed to dodge hydros, radars, RPF torpedoes, just random torpedoes, rocket planes, or just plane spotting in general. There are so many things that they're already having to deal with. And now they're supposed to somehow deal with submarines as well. How? Like, it's gonna be so very difficult to actually effectively deal with these things. Especially if they do, well, if you're actually in a smoke, this was something that I tested quite early. If you're in a smoke and ping, it works much like smoke firing penalty, which means you don't get the bloom, aka you're undetected, which means you can be pinging your homing torpedoes from a smoke and launching them at anyone nearby, which is, of course, quite effective. I think the art and the design and all the effort they put into making this could be spent extremely well by making this some sort of operation, like ambush a convoy, take down a convoy, avoid the cruisers, avoid the destroyers, sink this and this valuable cargo ship, or like sneak into a port, sink this battleship, then sneak out. Like, from a PvE perspective against bots, from a cooperative perspective, submarines could be great. They could be fantastic, they could be so much fun, like hunting down a submarine, landing that perfect torpedo is extremely satisfying. And pinging him and chasing him underwater can be a lot of fun. But from a PvP perspective, from a gameplay balance perspective, I do not see any way of actually making submarines work. Anyways, as always, thank you guys for watching the channel. Thank you guys for the support. I really do appreciate you guys subscribing. We broke 94k subs. Whoop whoop! Hit approaching 100k. And honestly, I've been doing so many of these disappointing commentaries lately. Well, not disappointing, but I feel like kind of depressing commentaries. So I'm gonna feature a ship that I actually find really fun next. I'm gonna feature the Mines. That ship has been released pretty much exactly the way as I tested it during the work in progress state, and hopefully Wargaming won't find a way to nerf this German ship, because I think it's a lot of fun. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys next time. Have a fantastic rest of the evening and enjoy your weekend.